Where is this plane coming from and who owns it? That is a question we're still working through. But as Darcy just said there a couple moments ago, Maryland State Police say they believe the plane is from a flight school in Montgomery County and that the aircraft may have been in a training flight at the time of the crash. Now, police did not name the flight school, but based off of data that is publicly available from flight tracking apps, it appears that the plane is owned by the Washington International Flight Academy, which is based out of Montgomery County Air Park in Gaithersburg. That's one of the bigger airports in our area where people learn how to fly. In fact, in our region, there are dozens of small airports from Frederick to Annapolis to Leesburg, many of them with flight schools that operate these small planes. Let's get to somebody now who can help to kind of put things into perspective for us. Jeff Gazzetti is an NBC News aviation analyst. He's a pilot, worked at the FAA and the NTSB. So Jeff, you have a lot of experience kind of working in what can be described only as a tragic situation. I know there's a lot that we still don't know, so we want to be careful to, not to speculate. But from everything you've seen so far, what are your initial thoughts on this crash?
Well, Joseph, everything seemed to be going fine with this flight. This was the third flight of the day. If you use those flight tracking apps, it took off earlier in the late afternoon, flew to Ocean City, hung out for about 3 hours, and then you see it taking off again from Ocean City, doing 3 circuits in the pattern as if someone was getting some night landing practice. And then it began its flight back to Montgomery County Airport, and something went wrong in the last 2 minutes of that flight, according to the flight radar. Perhaps it was an engine failure. Perhaps it was a lack of fuel going into the engine because there is no evidence of fire on the ground. So I think the NTSB and the FAA are going to be looking into what could have happened here.
So, Jeff, you worked at the NTSB, right? The National Transportation Safety Board, which, for anybody watching, if you don't know, the NTSB investigates every aviation accident in the U.S. as long as it isn't military related. I know that the NTSB also won't go out in person to every single crash site. Do you know if they're going to go out to something like this specifically? And if so, what does that whole process look like? It hasn't even been 24 hours.
Certainly. There's about 1,200 small airplane accidents each year in this country, and maybe about 250 of them are fatal. The NTSB launches to every single fatal accident. So you can be sure that there'll be at least one NTSB investigator at the scene, probably right now, with the help of an FAA inspector or two from the Baltimore FSDO. And what they're going to do is photograph the wreckage. They're going to look at the flight control actuators, and they'll take a close look at the engine and propeller to see if it was developing power. And that's just on scene. After that, they're going to be interviewing witnesses. They're going to be going to that flight school. They're going to be examining maintenance records. They're very thorough, and I'm sure they're going to get to the bottom of this.
It's a very meticulous investigation, and that's also the reason why it takes such a long time. We get these preliminary reports, kind of like a timeline of the flight, typically about a month after the crash, but we don't get that final report talking about any cause until typically 12 months after the accident. So it's going to be some time until we have all of those facts in front of us. Jeff, while I still have you, there's been a lot of questions about the timeline here. This plane went down at around 11:30 last night. It was in a wooded area of Bowie, but not necessarily a remote area of Bowie. What do you think? Why do you think it took first responders roughly 4 hours to find the aircraft after the crash actually happened?
Well, that's a good question. And I think part of the answer is it happened at night, right? It was dark. It happened late at night. If the engine was not running, if it did run out of fuel or there was a problem with the engine, you wouldn't be hearing the engine noise. And you would be hearing exactly what the witnesses just described to Darcy Spencer there, right? You'd be hearing maybe some branches breaking and then something that lasts a few seconds, not very loud. This is a very light airplane made out of aluminum, a couple of 1,000 pounds. It's not going to make a big hole in the ground. So not a lot of sound, but it is interesting that this airplane had to have been communicating with FAA Potomac Air Traffic Control. And because it was flying through the restricted airspace of Washington, D.C. So it does kind of surprise me it took this long to find.
You know, I think we'll just start off with this. The aviation community is a very tight-knit family, and anybody watching now, please know that we are praying for you. And we thank Jeff for his time and his expertise joining us live on this Father's Day. Thank you so much, sir.